I'm not a big fan of backcountry snowboarding. Sure, it's got that whole freedom vibe, but there's too much that can go wrong. But my friends, they're all about it. So when they dragged me along for a weekend of epic powder, I figured I'd go along. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. It started out fine. Blue skies, fresh snow, untouched trails. We hiked for what felt like hours to get to this hidden ridge, dropping into a bowl that was so pristine it looked like no one had ever set foot there. It was beautiful, until it wasn't. It was the third run of the day when we saw it. We were cutting through this tree line, trying to stay ahead of the setting sun. Jake was ahead, always the first to drop, yelling about how we'd never find snow like this again. Then he just stopped. "Yo, Jake, what's the holdup?" I called out, thinking he'd probably spotted some gnarly drop he wanted us to hit. But when I caught up, he wasn't looking at the trail. He was staring off to the side toward this small clearing. I followed his gaze, and that's when I saw it. There, half buried in the snow, was a person. At least I thought it was. They were so still, perfectly still. Their gear was ancient, like 80s neon. You know the kind of stuff you see in vintage ads? A cracked snowboard was sticking out of the snow nearby, the binding snapped clean off. "What the hell?" Jake muttered, his voice shaky. Is that a body?" I asked, my stomach flipping. We didn't get too close at first. I mean, what if it was fresh? What if there was a freak avalanche or something? But the more we stared, the more we realized something was off. The figure wasn't just frozen, it was preserved, like they'd been sitting there for years, but the snow hadn't touched them. Their goggles were perfectly clear, and their face, though pale and stiff, looked almost lifelike. Too lifelike. "We need to call someone," Sarah said, finally breaking the silence. She had her phone out, but of course we were too deep in the mountains for any kind of signal. Jake, always the idiot, thought we should check for a wallet or ID. "Dude, what if they've been missing for years? We could help the family, you know?" "Jake, don't," I snapped, but he was already stepping closer. As he got within a few feet, there was this sound, like ice cracking, sharp and sudden. We all froze. Jake stopped dead in his tracks, his breath visible in the cold air. Did that come from them?" Sarah whispered. I didn't want to believe it, but it sounded like the noise came from the figure. Jake backed up fast, and we all agreed to leave it alone and head back to report it. But as we turned to leave, I swear, I saw the faintest flicker of movement, just the smallest twitch of a finger. I told myself it was the wind, or my mind playing tricks. But it didn't feel like a trick. We made it back to the parking lot just as the sun dipped below the horizon. We flagged down a ranger and told them everything. He radioed for backup and said they'd send a team up first thing in the morning. The night was restless. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure in the snow. The way their goggles seemed to reflect the light even though there wasn't any, the eerie stillness, and that sound. The next morning we rode back up with the search team. They were all business: ropes, sleds, first aid kits. We led them to the spot, but when we got there, the clearing was empty. No body, no gear, nothing. "Are you sure this is the spot?" one of the rangers asked, giving us this skeptical look. "Yes, it was right here. The snowboard was sticking out of the snow. Bright green, cracked in half," Sarah insisted, her voice shaking. But the snow was untouched, pristine, no sign of anyone ever being there. The rangers shrugged it off as a mistake, maybe a shadow or drift we misinterpreted in the fading light. But as we turned to leave, I spotted something half hidden under a tree nearby, a piece of bright green plastic. I didn't say anything, just quietly picked it up and stuffed it into my pocket. When we got back to the car, I pulled it out to show the others. It was a shard of the broken snowboard, the same neon green we'd seen sticking out of the snow. Nobody said a word the whole ride home. But that night, as I lay in bed, I swore I heard that same cracking sound outside my window. I've been snowboarding for years, but that day on the mountain was the first time I genuinely felt like I might not make it out. It started out as a perfect day, thick fog hanging low over the peaks, giving everything this eerie, otherworldly vibe. My friends and I had been hitting the backcountry trails all morning, carving fresh powder and loving every second. But then the fog got thicker. You know how they say you can't see 2 feet in front of you? It was like that. The kind of fog that swallows sound and makes everything feel wrong. We were heading toward the tree line when I realized I'd lost sight of the group. I figured they'd just gone ahead. No big deal. I'd catch up. I shouted their names a couple of times, but my voice sounded weird in the fog, muffled and distant like it didn't belong to me. That's when I heard it, a whistle, short and sharp, cutting through the silence like a lifeline. At first, I thought it was one of my friends, maybe trying to guide me back. So I called out, "Hey, wait up," and started heading in the direction of the sound. The fog made everything feel closer than it was. I'd hear the whistle, move toward it, and then hear it again further away. It was like playing a game of Marco Polo with someone who didn't want to be found. After about 10 minutes, I realized I wasn't anywhere near the trails. The trees around me were massive, ancient, their branches twisting together overhead like a net. The snow was untouched, no tracks anywhere but my own. Then I heard the whistle again, closer this time. It sounded different, like it wasn't coming from someone blowing a whistle, but more like the sound was alive. It didn't rise and fall naturally. It just hung in the air, sharp and shrill, like it was echoing from inside my head. I yelled, "Who's there?" But no one answered. Just another whistle, a little louder, a little more insistent. I'll admit it. I started to panic. My heart was pounding, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The trees felt like they were closing in, the branches reaching down like fingers. Every time I thought I was heading in the right direction, the whistle would change, pulling me further in. And then I saw them. Tracks. Fresh snowboard tracks, cutting cleanly through the powder. Relief hit me like a wave. I wasn't alone after all. I followed them, hoping they'd lead me back to the trail or my friends. But as I got closer, something about the tracks didn't sit right. They were my tracks, the exact same ones I'd made when I first entered the woods. I knew because of the slight wobble in the turns, the way I'd skidded on a patch of ice. I'd been walking in circles. That's when I saw the footprints. They came out of nowhere, weaving in and out of my snowboard tracks, bare feet in the snow. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The whistle came again, this time so loud and clear it felt like it was right behind me. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing there, but there was nothing, just fog and trees. I tried to move, but my legs felt like lead. The whistle came again, and I swear I saw something move between the trees. Not a person exactly, just something. A shadow darker than the fog sliding silently between the trunks. I bolted. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get out. I stumbled over roots and rocks, the whistle following me the whole time. It never stopped. It didn't even sound like it was chasing me. It sounded like it was inside me, vibrating through my chest and skull. Somehow I broke through the tree line and onto an open slope. The fog was still thick, but I could see the faint outline of a trail marker up ahead. I didn't stop running until I hit the main trail and collapsed in the snow, gasping for air. My friends found me about an hour later, sitting in the snow, shaking like a leaf. I tried to explain what happened, but they just laughed it off. "You probably just got turned around in the fog," one of them said. "Happens all the time." But when I looked down at my board, my heart nearly stopped. The bindings were coated in frost except for 2 spots where it had melted clean through. The shape of fingers. I've always been the kind of person who pushes boundaries, especially on the slopes. If there's a sign that says no entry or danger off-piste, it feels less like a warning and more like an invitation. But that day, that was the last time I ever ignored one of those signs. The snow was perfect. Fresh powder, untouched, glistening in the sun. It was the kind of day snowboarders dream about. I'd been exploring the backcountry for hours, weaving through pine trees, chasing that rush. The official trails were crowded, noisy. This question mark, this was pure freedom. I didn't even notice the crevasse until it was too late. 1 second, I was gliding down a pristine slope, and the next, the ground gave way beneath me. The fall wasn't as far as I'd feared, maybe 15-20 feet, but it was far enough to knock the wind out of me. When I finally caught my breath and looked up, I realized just how bad it was. The walls of the crevasse were jagged and slick with ice towering above me. My board was wedged awkwardly between two chunks of ice, and there was no way I was climbing out on my own. I grabbed my phone, but of course there was no service. My friends were miles away, probably already halfway through their après-ski beers. I shouted for help, my voice echoing off the icy walls, but it felt like yelling into a void. After a few minutes, I gave up. No one was going to hear me out here. That's when I noticed the sound. At first I thought it was the wind, a low, hollow hum, almost musical, like the glacier was singing. But the longer I listened, the more it felt deliberate, rhythmic, like a voice trying to speak through the ice. I shook my head, trying to snap out of it. I was alone, stranded, probably concussed. Of course I was hearing things. But then it came again. Louder. Closer. I sat perfectly still, straining to hear over the pounding of my own heart. The sound was coming from deeper in the crevasse, from the shadows where the ice turned a deep, suffocating blue. It was a voice, a low, guttural whisper, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. The whisper stopped, and then something moved. It was subtle at first, a faint crunch of snow, a shift in the shadows. I told myself it was just the glacier settling, the ice shifting. But as the minutes dragged on, the movements became more deliberate. Footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps, echoing up from the depths. "Hey, is someone down there?" My voice bounced off the walls, but I got no response. Just more footsteps, closer now. I grabbed my board, yanking it free from the ice. If someone or something was coming for me, I wasn't going down without a fight. I held the board like a shield, my eyes locked on the darkness below, and then I saw it. At first it was just a shape, a silhouette in the shadows. But as it moved closer, the light from above caught its face, or what should have been its face. The features were blurred, distorted, like someone had tried to carve a human face out of ice and failed. Its eyes were empty sockets, its mouth a gaping hole, jagged and black. And it was smiling. I scrambled backward, the ice cutting into my palms. The thing didn't move fast, but it didn't have to. It just stood there staring at me with that frozen, lifeless grin. I could feel the temperature drop, the air around me growing heavier, sharper. My breath came out in ragged, visible gasps. "Stay back!" I shouted, swinging my board in front of me. The thing tilted its head, like it was curious, and then it started to hum. That same low, haunting hum I'd heard earlier, but now it was right in front of me, vibrating through my skull. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't just in the air. It was in the ice, in the ground, in me. I don't know how I found the strength to move, but I did. I turned and started climbing, digging my hands and boots into the ice, desperate to get out. The thing didn't chase me. It didn't have to. The hum grew louder, the vibration shaking the crevasse, making the walls crack and splinter. Chunks of ice fell around me, and I knew if I didn't get out soon, I'd be buried alive. Somehow I made it to the top. I pulled myself over the edge and collapsed in the snow, my lungs burning, my body trembling. I looked back into the crevasse, half expecting to see that thing climbing after me. But it was gone. The hum stopped. The air was still. All that was left was the sound of my ragged breathing and the distant wind. I didn't stick around to see if it would come back. I grabbed my board and hiked back to the main trail as fast as I could, not caring if I looked like a lunatic to the other skiers. When I finally made it back to the lodge, I told my friends I'd taken a bad fall and needed to call it a day. I didn't tell them about the crevasse or the whispers or the thing in the ice. I don't go off-piste anymore. Not because I'm afraid of falling or getting lost, but because I know what's waiting out there, and I know it's still humming. It was supposed to be the perfect end to the day. One last run, just me, the fresh powder, and the fading glow of the sunset over the mountains. The slopes had emptied out, leaving the kind of eerie stillness I usually loved. But that night, something felt different. I ignored it, chalking it up to exhaustion and the creeping cold. The lift operator looked surprised when I slid into the chairlift line. "Last ride," he said, giving me a hesitant nod. I nodded back, and the chair swept me up into the air, creaking slightly as it climbed the steep incline. The sun had almost completely set by then, and the mountain grew darker with every passing second. At first, I enjoyed the silence. The world below me was a sea of white glittering under the faint light of the moon. But as the chairlift climbed higher, the shadows seemed to stretch and shift, like they were alive. I shook it off. Long day, tired legs. I'd been on this mountain 100 times. It was just the usual tricks your mind plays when you're alone in the dark. Halfway up, I started to notice something strange. The lift didn't stop, not once. No skiers were disembarking ahead of me. No one coming down the hill. The lodge lights at the top seemed further away than they should have been, dim and hazy through the snowfall. My stomach tightened, but I told myself it was fine. The staff was just wrapping up for the night, clearing out the stragglers. Then the snow started to fall harder, thick, wet flakes that seemed to come out of nowhere, blotting out the landscape. My tracks from earlier in the day disappeared in seconds. The lift creaked and swayed under the weight of the accumulating snow, and I tightened my grip on the bar in front of me. "Almost there," I muttered to myself. "Just get to the top." When I finally reached the unloading point, my breath caught. The lodge was dark. No lights, no staff, no skiers milling around with their gear. The chairlift didn't stop moving. It just kept going, carrying me past the station and further up the mountain. My chest tightened as I twisted around in the seat, trying to see the lodge through the snow, but it was gone, like it had never been there at all. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice swallowed by the wind. "Stop the lift!" No response. The chair kept climbing higher and higher, the ground below me vanishing into the swirling snow. The only sound was the rhythmic groan of the lift and the distant howl of the wind. I fumbled for my phone, but of course there was no service, no signal, no way to call for help. Panic started to set in. I tried to think logically. Maybe the lift operator had made a mistake. Maybe this was some maintenance route. But then why were there no other chairs? Why was I the only one left? And then I saw it. A shape on the slope below me, barely visible through the snow. It was standing perfectly still, facing the chairlift. At first I thought it was a skier, maybe someone lost like me. But the longer I stared, the more I realized it wasn't moving at all. It was just watching. The lift kept climbing. I turned my head, trying to shake off the image, but my heart was pounding now. When I glanced back, the figure was gone. I leaned forward in the chair, squinting through the snow, but there was nothing there. Just white, endless white. And then the chair stopped. The sudden jolt almost sent me tumbling forward. The lift swayed in the wind, creaking ominously as I gripped the bar in front of me. I was dangling in midair, far from the ground, the mountain stretching endlessly below me. "Hello?" I yelled. My voice echoed into the void, lost in the storm. The snow was falling so hard now that I could barely see past the edge of the chair. My hands were freezing, my gloves useless against the biting cold. I needed to get down. Now I looked up at the cable above me, trying to gauge if I could climb along it. That's when I noticed the footprints. Not on the ground, on the cable itself. Small, distinct prints, like someone had walked along the line, heading in my direction. My stomach dropped. I stared at the prints, following their path until they vanished into the darkness above me. The chair swayed again, harder this time, as if something had brushed against it. And then I felt it. A hand on my shoulder. I screamed. jerking forward so hard I almost fell out of the chair. When I turned, there was nothing there, just the empty seat behind me, coated in snow. My breath came in ragged gasps as I scanned the area, my heart racing so fast it felt like it might explode. The lift creaked again, this time louder. I looked up and for a split second I saw a face, pale, hollow, pressed against the cable above me. And then it was gone, disappearing into the storm. I didn't wait. I unstrapped my board and jumped, landing hard in the snow below. Pain shot through my leg as I stumbled, but I didn't stop. I ran, my board clutched in one hand, the snow swallowing my steps as I barreled down the slope. The figure was there again, closer this time, standing between me and the path down. I veered to the left, cutting through the trees, my breath coming in panicked gasps. The wind howled around me, carrying faint whispers I couldn't understand. When I finally reached the bottom of the slope, the lodge was back, lights on, music playing, people laughing inside. I stumbled through the door, shaking and covered in snow. No one even noticed me as I collapsed onto a bench trying to catch my breath. I never told anyone what happened. I just grabbed my stuff, got in my car, and left. I've been snowboarding my whole life, but I haven't set foot on a mountain since. Because whatever was up there, it wasn't human. You know that feeling when the world seems too quiet? Like not peaceful quiet, but the kind of quiet that wraps around you. Suffocating, unnatural. That's how it felt that day. I'd hit the slopes early, hoping to avoid the mid-morning crowd. By 10 a.m., though, the place was packed. People everywhere laughing, shouting, snow spraying like confetti. Don't get me wrong, I love the energy, but sometimes I just want the mountain to myself. That's when I spotted it. A narrow trail cutting off from the main run, barely visible through the trees. No signs, no markers, just an inviting stretch of untouched snow. I figured it was a service trail or something. Maybe not officially open, but probably fine. I veered left, weaving through the trees, and the noise of the crowd disappeared almost immediately. It was bliss, just me, the board, and the sound of snow crunching underfoot. But then, the snow started to change. It was pristine, too pristine. No tracks, no evidence of wildlife. Even my own tracks seemed to disappear seconds after I passed, swallowed by the perfect white surface. At first, I told myself it was just the wind or the angle of the slope, but the unease started creeping in. I stopped to catch my breath, planting my board in the snow. That's when I heard it. A faint whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind playing tricks, but then it came again, clearer this time. Words. Or at least something like words. Too quiet to make out, but just loud enough to send a chill down my spine. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and ridiculous in the vast empty space. Nothing. Just the whisper again, faint and directionless. I shook it off, told myself I was being paranoid, and started riding again. But now, the trail seemed wrong. The trees were closer together, their branches twisted and bare. The snow glistened unnaturally, almost like ice, and the slope seemed to stretch endlessly ahead. No turns, no dips, just a straight, featureless path. And then, I felt it. That unmistakable sensation of being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see someone, another rider maybe. But there was nothing. Just the trees, their shadows stretching unnaturally long in the weak winter light. I pushed on, trying to focus on the ride, but the whispers were getting louder. Not words exactly, more like murmurs, overlapping and indistinct like a crowd just out of sight. My heart was pounding now, every instinct screaming at me to turn around. But when I looked back, the trail behind me was gone. No trees, no snow, just an endless white void. That's when I saw the figure. It was just ahead, standing perfectly still in the middle of the trail. I couldn't make out any details, just a dark silhouette against the snow. It wasn't moving, but somehow I knew it was looking at me, watching. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Are you okay?" No response. The whispers stopped. I froze, every muscle in my body tense. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. The air felt heavier, the cold seeping through my jacket and biting into my skin. I couldn't explain why, but I knew I couldn't stay there. Slowly, I adjusted my board, trying to keep my eyes on the figure as I turned. It took a step forward. That was all it took. I bolted, carving through the snow as fast as I could, my heart hammering in my chest. The whispers were back, louder now, and I swore I could hear footsteps behind me crunching in the snow. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. The trail started to curve, the trees blurring past me. For a moment, I thought I'd lost it. Whatever it was. Then, I burst out of the trees and into the open. The lodge was right there, bustling with people, music playing, kids laughing. It was like nothing had happened. I stumbled to a stop, gasping for air. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand. One of the staff members noticed me and came over asking if I was okay. I nodded, muttering something about taking a bad fall, but I couldn't stop glancing back at the trailhead. Except, there was no trail. The spot where I'd veered off was gone, just a solid wall of trees with no sign of an opening. My tracks, my board marks, everything. It was like I'd never left. I tried to brush it off, told myself it was just my imagination or some weird trick of the light. But as I walked back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. And when I glanced over my shoulder just for a second, I thought I saw a dark figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching, waiting.